Welcome everybody of Yoga, Disability, and Transformation. I'm hoping this one's going to be particularly dependent, I hope, on all of you sharing wisdom about, and I'm going to introduce this, but be thinking about stories of your evolving stories in how you think about and identify yourself, because the evolution of stories like that are essential to living well with a disability. So I'm giving you a warning early because I'm going to want you to think a little bit about it, and hopefully you don't think the whole time and so you don't listen. But I really think that as we share wisdom with each other about that, and there'll be people that'll watch this on review, so think about that a little bit. So this one, so just sit up straight and tall for a second, and then allow the dropping. If you think that you are describing from your mind only, I think that's part of the trap when it comes to sharing stories, is that, and also with living with a disability, is that somehow the managing organ is the mind to the exclusion of everything else. That's part of something that I'm hoping over time that we can all transform. In introduction to this, and this topic has been suggested by one of our adaptive students, so she'll be called on in a little bit. But I want to give some context and some background, right? As we know, everyone on the call, I think, disability is both an inward and an outward experience. Now, what those words mean, they're just words, but there's an internal and an external experience of disability. And to point out some of the obvious ones, it's true on so many levels. One obvious thing to say is, like, our friends and families have insights about disability by being close around us, then that's true. And still, they have no idea about the inward experience of trauma, loss, and disability. So both of those statements are true, right? That there's territory that is inaccessible for certain people that aren't living the experience directly, and even between everybody. And obviously the culture beyond that is way farther behind, that there's an inward experience. Now, this is the fact that people don't fully appreciate and get that there's an inward experience of disability. This is not a woe is us story, right? I think that primarily has the responsibility for that being an unknown feature within our culture is primarily not our fault, but the responsibility resides with us, people that live the experience. In order to be able, and part of it is that it's a story that needs to be told and explored that doesn't have judgment or shame, right? Both for the people telling the stories and about the experience, but also in how you want the listener to hear it, right? All too often, there's a subtext for the listener that actually shuts down their minds to what you're saying, which is that there's like somehow they're doing something wrong, that somehow they're missing the point, that somehow there's something that they're not getting. And we're used to thinking about that way because in a way that's how civil rights has been presented within our culture, not just with disability. So part of the story is to figure out that in order to actually tell our stories better, right? There's a line by Kevin Kling: until the lion tells its story, the hunter will always be the hero, right? And the question is, how do you tell a story that actually not only makes the hunter stop hunting? I don't think of our culture as a hunter, but go with the metaphor. But makes the hunter realize that they don't even want to be in the field that they find themselves in, that they've misseen the entire field that they're hunting in, not just that they need to stop hunting. So in other words, our stories have to create transformative opportunity for the listener. That's more tricky, right? That's right. And the only way that we're going to get as a group, but also within this group that I hope we're building something together, is if we become more aware of our own stories and how to tell them, right? And the good thing about this group that I hope we can support each other, and not just our gripes, but stories that invite, learn to tell stories that invite, is that these types of stories need company. They need practice. They need to be heard. They need to evolve by having a sympathetic listener. Because as Kevin Kling will tell you about stories, you don't know you have to tell a story multiple times to watch how it's going to enter the world, right? That you don't just tell it once. It's not about the facts as you see the story. Stories that transform require a not to be served up in palatable form for the listener, but it requires an integration and connection between views that makes stories beautiful, right? So, and I hope that this group today, you'll be willing to share some of those stories. I want to say a little bit more, back up a little bit more to talk about these words that I don't even know exactly what they mean. I do think I have some clue, but the gulf between inward and outward, right? That I want to try to say that that's a space and a gulf. And by inward, this is like a really important point from my perspective. By inward, I don't just mean that the experience of trauma, loss, and disability has psychological and emotional components. That's true. But I think that if you limit the inward experience of disability to the relation to psychological or emotional access, I think you miss part of the beauty, and you miss part of why we tell stories, right? That stories do more than talk about what it's like to feel the experience of trauma, loss, and disability. They allow for the listener to actually, in some ways, feel safe enough in order for their consciousness to open. Now, that seems funny. Am I supposed to keep the listener safe? If you want to transform them, you surely do. You surely do. And that's part of what I think that the evolution of storytelling when it comes to the experience of trauma, loss, and disability needs to evolve and move. And that's part of why Mind Body Solutions has done Body, Mind, Story. So, I mean, so this idea that there's a separation between the experience as we know it from the inside and what it is to live within loved ones, but also within the culture at large. That I want to metaphorically call that a distance or a gap, right? And I actually think that's literal, but I'll just go with metaphorical in case you want to quibble about it. I actually think that there's a distance in there, and it's so the experience of disability is, or the experience of this gap is between the mind and the body. And it is something that every human being deals with, this gap between inward and outward, between oneself and others. This is an existential gap, but it's even more acute when you're dealing with a marginalized person, a marginalized population, right? That our experience of this gap has gotten heightened awareness and definition because of the increased social marginalization, power marginalization that occurs by mostly a well-intending listener, by friends and family or from the culture. They don't mean not to hear. It's like literally, they don't know how to hear the depth in the story, right? And so I also want to say that gap, that marginalized gap, I mean, a lot of times we think about that gap between inward and outward, and when you're not heard on the inside, as a form of disempowerment. I also think that's a story. It's one we want to tell sometimes. Other times, I want to claim it as a strength. Be careful of our stories. Be careful of presenting ourselves as a marginalized population and intrinsically and eternally we're disempowered because of it. Like I've said before, one of the great transitions in my awareness has been with Kevin Kling reminding me that disability doesn't mean inability. I've said this almost every time we're together. Disability means ability that's traveled through the world of shadow and reflection. Right? Now, the world of shadow doesn't mean mental reflection. The world of shadow is hardship. Right? And that so disability, already I want to claim that as wisdom. It's earned ability. Right? And again, how we tell our stories here really matter. Right? I think the gap between inward and outward and the struggle of finding expression from inside to out and not taking too much in from outside to in. In other words, what I mean from inside to out is how do you share experience from inside to out, but also how do you make sure you don't take too much in from outside to in, right? This is something like to shift to another population that I think that this is a horrible generalization. Please, I mean this well, that women unfortunately have been forced with too much outside to in from our culture about what appearance is, for example. That there's an example of too much emphasis placed on the culture, on the bodies of women from outside to in rather than inside to out, right? So this doesn't just apply to disability as part of my point. The struggle from inside to out is one form. What your boundaries are from outside to in is another form of this that traverses this gap that I think, and I want to say this gap is energetic. I don't know a better word for it. It's a sensation. It's an energy. It's also the makings of what self-realization is. What's the depth in you that your mind can't fully access, that your actions express, that help you feel confident about your own experience without having to prove it to others. Right? Again, we're in a zone of human experience that's difficult, not just for people with trauma, loss, and disability. It's difficult, right? And it takes some subtlety. So what do I mean? So what I mean by just to give an oversimplified example of experiential sensation of what I mean by the gap. So after your next exhalation, unless you have some breathing issues, right? After your next exhalation, hold your breath. And then notice how good the inhalation feels after that. And then let it out again. Don't inhale. There's a gap here. And then that gap makes you happy for the inhalation, right? And by the way, the energy of retention is with you whether you're inhaling or exhaling. It's part of what Zen practitioners call the great nu, NU, right? There's an unchanging, contentless part of our experience. To make it more funny, this would be the place that Bob Dylan might call Highway 61. Anyone know that song? Please tell me you know that song. If you don't know that song, go know that song, right? I'll start quoting it if you're not careful, right? All right, but like it's part of, for the human mind, that place, that gap is also a place of fear and uncertainty and tends to be seen as darkness, right? And so, and one of the things that's, if you think about story, so as you exhale this next time and hold on to your breath, and then take an inhalation again, I'm not sure how you directly describe that sensation, that experience of the silent gap that exists within experience, the silent place, the unchanging place. If I try to describe that directly, my words tend to fail. But once I breathe and introduce movement into that place, right, I'm comforted again. Now think about storytelling as bringing breath, literally breath and movement, to a space of experience, a gap that separates you from the world, but also connects you to the world. So I kind of think of story as a human innovation. And why stories end up with symbols and don't always have to be literal is what makes them powerful descriptors, right? That story is going to be the way you're going to be able to capture and or express. You can't capture because it's uncapturable, but to express through description and story places that other people can't get to. So as you can tell, I really think a lot about story as one of the vehicles, right? And the kinds of stories we tell actually matters. So what I hope for the discussion today is that we start sharing some stories that help describe the gulf within our marginalized experience, right? And we do it thinking and believing that you're sharing wisdom with others on the call, not trying to get your story heard. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, necessarily, right? So in a way, what I'm doing here is trying to introduce a discussion, a context that captures what I meant by healing stories in Waking. Okay, if you read Waking and you think back to the introduction, there are two big components I have in there. And one of them I talk about a lot is silence or emptiness. When I'm public speaking, I don't talk about healing stories as much, only because the conversation tends to go sideways so quickly in a group. I've never effectively been able to have and facilitate a really easy discussion about this. But here's how I described it in Waking. Healing story is my term for the stories we have come to believe that shape how we think about the world, ourselves, and our place in it. They can be as simple as everything happens as for a reason, or as sharp as how come nothing ever works out for me. Healing stories guide us through good and bad times. They can be both constructive and destructive. and are often in need of change. They come together to create our own personal mythologies, the systems of belief that guide how we interpret our experience. Quite often, they bridge the silence we carry within us and are essential to how we live. My story is full of healing stories. They have come from healthcare professionals, from my family, from outside the in, right? From myself, which is both an inside to outside expression, but also an outside to in expression, right? Because I'm thinking about my own stories. Now, they come from myself and eventually from the practice of yoga. These stories have profoundly shaped my perceptions of my own body, how my body and mind interact. They determine whether I see possibilities within the silence of my paralysis, the gap between me and the rest of the world, right? Or I stop at feeling only its limitations. If I think about it just as limitations, the tones of my stories are going to be less inviting, right? I believe that we all share an inevitable confrontation with an increasing inward silence. I also believe that our stories truly matter. So this idea that there are stories we all carry and that must evolve in order to deal with the experience of disability. But what I want to reiterate is I don't just mean psychological stories. I mean sensations, perceptions. I can tell you what I first felt within my paralysis when I was first injured, when I was 10 years into my injury, when I was after 10 years of practicing yoga. My stories about sensation within my body have evolved. When I start to let those stories evolve, right, then my stories about how I describe disability evolve and ultimately led to mind-body solutions, right? So this idea that what I want as part of this conversation today is to try to connect what might be called, well, I'm going to pause right there and say, now I want to switch to something that one of our adaptive students brought up to me as a possible topic. And this is, so what I've said before is a context for what I think she brought up, which I think is a really interesting way of thinking about this. But the word itself is a little bit loaded, especially politically loaded, right? And so here's how this is Angela Beeching, right? And I'm gonna ask her, I'm gonna talk to her a little bit, but here's what she sent to me a while back in October, and I've been thinking about it ever since. She wants to maybe have us share stories of identity. Here's a quote from her email to me. I'm thinking of this in terms of how we progress from identifying ourselves in some sense as victims to next identifying ourselves as survivors, then on to the third stage in which we no longer define ourselves in relationship to our diagnosis, accident, disability, or trauma. And instead, we choose for ourselves an identity we grow into. One of the things I like that, and then she goes on to say, I'm not assuming that we finish one stage for good and never go back. This is wisdom from Angela. But that we probably cycle through these within a day or a week. At least I do. And I hope to spend more time in the third stage as we experience and claim more of our agency. And agency is, again, a way of thinking about this. This might be helpful for everyone on the call to hear how our peers have experienced these stages and notice how these stages feel and are experienced in our bodies, right? So what Angela is doing for me is thinking about what are your identity stories, right, within the context of healing stories that bridge the gap within our experience from inward to out, right? And they're how you think about yourself. You know, we all know some of the barfy ones, right? Right, that we all have been inundated with, you know, like oh my God, we overcome great obstacles and succeed in our life. Like there's a whole general category of overcoming stories, right? You could identify, right? All different ways. You're getting thanked, Angela, for your insight, by the way, in the chat box. But like so like there are all sorts of types of stories, but also how do you view on that secret, quiet place of you that happens at 2 a.m? How are you thinking about what happens? How have those stories evolved? If you share this with other people who are going through things at different stages of their own process, this is the stuff of deep wisdom that we should be supporting each other in, right? So I'm going to call Angela onto the call. She's going to come on screen with me, get focused, and we're going to talk a little bit about her version of the story. Now, I asked her to do this, by the way, in order to give you all courage to speak about your stories, right? We're all going to have different versions of these stories, right? And then we're going to have the stories we tell for the outside world, for friends and family. We're going to have for the culture at large. They're all different forms. So one of the things that Kevin Kling says and believes in his bones is that there's no such thing as a bad story, right? There may not be the best time and place for a story, right? But that's not true here. You've got listeners here on this call that are going to help your stories evolve. And they'll evolve as you tell them. So Angela, will welcome on to the call.
Thanks.
So I found out today when I talked to Angela briefly today, and I'm sorry, I'm still fascinated by this, Angela. She's as she said it today, a recovering cellist, which makes me really happy, right? Like, because I love the cello. I don't know if you love the cello. Like a cello tells its own story, right? And Angela, you're also, did you say, how did you describe it? A musical coach? Can you tell me what was that?
I'm a music career coach.
A career coach. So can you give me an example of a student without their names, obviously? What you mean, someone that wants to make it a career, or like who?
No, I work with professionals on promotional issues for their music careers, mainly classical, but also jazz musicians. So sometimes people come to me with projects that they want to go forward on, and they're stuck in some way, sometimes with their stories.
Yeah.
That's what we work on.
So I don't know why this whole thing tickles me that she's a cellist that helps people go deeper and farther to music. I think this is a wonderful thing to know about. I know that everyone on the call has got their own little version. So switching back to the topic at hand, Angela, like what, like say a little bit about what made you think about this, and or just how examples of how your stories have emerged or evolved.
So I asked the question completely selfishly because I wanted to know how other people deal with this. And if I had known this was going to be me on the hot seat, I don't think I would have volunteered, but I'm okay.
I gave her the option to say no today.
I know you did. I'm challenging myself. So I just for context, I was 32 when I was diagnosed with PTSD and a dissociative disorder. And the first chunk of that time, really, I would describe myself in victim mode. I was really trying to figure out how to manage because I didn't know what I was dealing with. I would say that victim mode felt like my world had collapsed and there was only the diagnosis, this thing that I felt like I couldn't talk to other people about. And so it made this big rift between what I was experiencing inside and what I was going to have to deal with outside. And for me, the whole push was trying to get myself into survivor mode. and which is where I stayed for most of my adult life. And this felt like pushing myself forward, pushing myself into situations, sort of like bearing down, to keep the inside stuff inside and deal with what was coming at me outside. And I just want to say, I am the empress of dissociation. I am really, really good at that. So I compartmentalize everything, and mainly am divorced from my body most of the time, which is why I came to NBS.
So would you say that, like, the switch from victim to survivor was a willful orientation?
Yeah.
Willful plus what? I mean, I'm kind of curious about.
The reality of managing my own life. So that's part of what was folded into it. I would say for the longest time, just proud that I was surviving, proud that I could do what I was doing. Proud, I mean, unfortunately, proud that I was keeping everything to myself mainly. And so it, great for the coping skills, but, not so great for whatever that third stage might be.
Did you see all the head nods? You just hit some descriptions there where I saw multiple head nods of exactly, because each stage, for all of experience, they have benefits to each stage, right? There's also limitations in each stage, right? You should be proud of surviving, not just you, but all of us on the call, for managing your life, for doing whatever you're doing, right? I mean, so each stage has got good and bad things about it. So when did you start to think about shifting?
I think it's only been in maybe the last 5 years, and that I really was trying to figure out how could I be more in my body. And I didn't mention I had a concussion a year and a half ago, so I'm still working through some stuff around that. And before the concussion, I was taking Qigong, which was helping me feel a little bit more in my body. And after the concussion, I couldn't do the Qigong anymore. I don't know why, but I could not do it. And so that brought me to MBS. And this really naive, I just want to say, this naive thought that, okay, I'm going to learn how to experience more sensations in my body. That's really what I thought. I thought that's what I'm doing. And of course, all that came up with this is so much emotions. And I was so unprepared for this. And so it's like everything is cranked up really, really loud emotionally. So the tough stuff is really, really tough, but also surprisingly good stuff is more vivid. My sister, I told her this the other week, that I'd noticed that I'd been dancing in my kitchen. And if you knew how rare this is, it's extremely rare. So that's what's going on. I don't know what that third stage really is, though. The third stage that I'm reaching towards. I'm hoping other people can.
So I'm curious before we open it up, like, so, but you kind of know that you want to get to a different place, even though you don't quite know what it is.
Yeah.
Right. I also want to, I want to follow that up in a second, that I love that you say that you have them all, that you might have them all in one day, right? Or in a week. And ever not honor the dance partner that got you to surviving, right? I'm saying that to everybody. It's like they're useful, right? Those different versions, those different stories are still useful as long as they leave space for other ones, right? You about to say something? Look like something's about to come out of your mouth. I don't want to cut you off. You're good?
I'm good.
Okay. And so, but this idea of like, how do you like, in a way, to take something that Angela said to too far an extreme, I'm never not gonna think of myself as having to survive a spinal cord injury. You know what I mean? Like, and yet to not overly identify myself as just a person with disability. I would say in my willful phases of survivorship, I would think it was a compliment when someone forgot I was in a wheelchair. There are all these things that like people say, my God, I forget you're in a wheelchair. I think that was great, right? And so there are different versions and expressions of that, because I was trying so hard to be like just any other kid, right? Because I was injured when I was 13 and I was trying to fit back in high school and junior high and try, and so I had this whole version of thinking that, yeah, that's cool. And then of course I if you can see in the background, we're having like a big snowstorm here. I decided to go to the biggest outdoor college campus pretty much in the United States in the middle of Minnesota. Winter quarter in Minnesota, the University of Minnesota, is freaking brutal, right? But I was going to do it because that's where I would have gone had I not been injured. That kind of heroic healing story of what it meant to survive my disability, right? To say that it's not getting the best of me, God damn it, right? And Mike, you know what it just did? It made me wet for like 3 months out of the year and have to take long naps of complete exhaustion. But the good news, during that time, I found a whole bunch of U2 music that used to comfort me. So I can still hear the songs, A Sort of Homecoming, Unforgettable Fire. Off of that, those are the songs that I would will myself pushing through the snow for miles at a time, right? There were a whole bunch of those, that time period, that I learned stuff about myself too, right? All right, so those are a couple of my like quick little snippets of things that happened. So anyone else want to, Angela, do you want to say anything more about this, or the transition to the third stage, or how do you identify?
I know that this thing about being heroic is really problematic for a lot of people. And but I have been using the hero's journey.
Me too.
In terms of the internal process, because the descent and that sense of the ego death and having that transformation, I think, is really at the core of what we're talking about, the transforming into the person that you need to be.
So one of the things that we try to get across in Body, Mind, Story when we've taught it, and this is something that Kevin Kling has put to words really well for that workshop, which that the hero's journey always has to be paradoxical, right? So at the same time, there's a hero part of the phase, right? There's also just a deep unwillingness to admit you're vulnerable.
Yeah.
Right. And that's at least for my experience, right? And that kind of tension and paradox. Kevin Kling will say every hero's journey, either the hero either loses home or comes home, and usually both in the same story, right? So, coming down to recognizing the stories that got you through different phases in your life to bring you home to where you might be able to be now, and knowing where you are now might have potential for the future. That next phase. Okay, let's listen to anyone else. Anyone else know what that next phase is? Anyone got it? Either the stories that move beyond your thinking of yourself as a trauma, loss, or disability survivor or whatever, or expressions of the heroic phase? Don't make me call on people. Oh, Bill, you got your
Bill,
hand.
sweetie.
Let me unmute. Let me unmute.
You're unmuted. You're good.
Yeah, I am now. I know. Yeah. For me, just a quick prerequisite. I've been in a chair for 10 years, and I started trauma work in the 90s, and thank God came to some eye movement people that weren't many around back then. And had I not, I think I don't know that I would be here 10 years from now. I mean, based on the last 10 years. But I feel that is the beginning, part of the beginning of getting to the next stage is taking out the garbage in our past, in our memory, and cleaning through that and shedding the pieces that don't exist anymore, the victim pieces coming to face with when they interact in my interaction with life, no matter if I'm paralyzed or not. But having had a little experience doing that before, and coming out of Western medicine, as you pointed out in your book, in two spheres, above the injury, below the injury, or, above the function and below the function line, wherever it might be, was an important part to start being able to then relate to the same situation. I experienced coming into my injury is being in that snowstorm in a whiteout. I mean, I had no vision, I had no contrast, I had nothing to really grasp on anymore. And I think it was a blessing I was forced into have to recreating a life just to start moving from a bed to a wheelchair, to a car, to whatever. So I think that's critical. And it's a path along with the expression of that whiteout. As you stay there long enough, I see it as the eye of the hurricane. You find the way into the eye. And then if you stay there long enough, then you can start slowing down the eye to start cherry picking out what needs to remain, if that makes any sense.
It does. I'm curious if you can give an example or two of things that you've been able to let go of or shed that no longer were serving.
My first 6 years in recovery, I died twice, and I did 2 10Ks. I did a couple ocean swims. I went kayaking. I went snow skiing, and I just about killed myself. Being this as close to the same as I left, until I realized I couldn't hold on to the same anymore. And I had so much pain from trying to keep that post in the past and then migrate to the future and get torn apart in between. I have to keep the post as a plow, as I look at it metaphorically, and drag it with me and throw seeds behind me so that I can keep going. And that's kind of how I try to picture myself when I'm in my best place. And that, like Angela, was so wonderful to talk about. I cycle through those 100 times, those 3 places 100 times minimum a day. It's all, and sometimes both, and sometimes all 3, and all jumbled up, and just letting the dust settle a little bit, and the visions contrast start creating.
Bill, but I'm just going to say that I want to take this deep. I love the distinguishing between a post and a plow. Not only is that good alliteration, but it actually is a very powerful thing. But when you are trying to go back, right, and you were from what you're describing, you were trying to stay connected to a level of your identity as a doer, as an achiever, to try to make sure you didn't lose too much as you went forward into this new life, right? So in a way, that attempt of that's me. I was going to go to the University of Minnesota when I was 10, because I was at a football game when my sister was there as a freshman, and I thought I was at homecoming. I thought it was the coolest thing I ever saw. So I turned 18 to 19, and I'm going to freaking go there again, right? Because if I didn't, I'm no longer the same person. right? So this idea of you like doing this kind of, is a way to make continuity of identity. And so what I hear in the shift between the post and the plow is that you've recognized that identity is fluid.
But I also recognize that I can only release so much at a time. I can't become untethered completely, or else I'm spinning out of control, which I get often. And I have a condition that's anatomic dysreflexia. Shortly, I get an adrenal pump going and I can't shut it off. So I cannot shut adrenaline going into my system, and my blood pressure will go up to 225 over 135 in 30 minutes if I have to piss and it's the wrong day, whatever. So I'm managing the speed rush at the same time. And as the intensity of stress comes, the intensity of adrenaline. So it forces you that, for me, it gets real apparent that I need to let go because I'm depleted and I'm in bed for 3 days, trying to recover from a 2-week trip up to New England and getting through it, but it was important to do it. And it was a mammoth undertaking. It was the most stellar experience I've ever had at the same time. And if my stake is too hard plant, I can never get into this new experience of slower and magical. And that's where the superpowers come, is when that wind, learn how to set the wind, get it slowed down. You can see, the veil's gone, so you see both sides of it. I mean, most of the people on this call started off with some level of the right side of the fence, and we've gotten to where we are. I mean, that's a broad assumption, but, it's a big jump and it's a big bang when we get to the bottom of where we have to start.
So like if I were like and I want to move on and let someone else say so, but I love this. If you were to what a great image of a story to tell between the post and the plow, right? Think about all the associations that a fence post has in mythology and storytelling in the back, what plows mean, the throwing the seeds behind, there's again built in, if you were to stay within that metaphor for 5 minutes of a story, you're going to get someone to realize the paradox of continuity having to be, and identity having to be fluid without ever having to talk about identity. But you know what I mean? It's a very powerful storytelling context. Kimberly, you have your hand up.
Hi there. Thanks so much. I really appreciate what everyone's sharing. And a question for you, this in-between place that I feel that I'm in, still trying to grasp diagnoses and deal with that part and moving forward. There's this in-between place of trying to communicate still after years and years with my partner without getting stuck in, okay, I have these disabilities, or I have this diagnosis, or I have this pain, or whatever the description is, the title, the label. Mm-hmm. Being able to communicate, hey, I'm not being lazy. I'm trying to take care of myself today, without having to say that all the time, right? Because I don't even want to talk about the diagnoses anymore, because they're there, they exist, and let's keep working with it. But the more I talk about being in pain, for example, I feel like it makes more pain, right? So I don't want to go to my partner and say, I'm hurting so much today, I can't do this or I can't do that. I haven't figured out how to communicate that. So I'm curious.
So there's a good toss-up question for the group. What have some of you figured out how to say to get the space you need for, let's call it, for lack of a better word, let's get a better word, Kimberly, self-care? Right? When you're having a bad day, do you have any practical tricks or things you do? Because I know what I would do is I'd probably just assume my partner's supposed to know it, and I'd get mad at them for not knowing that I'm freaking wiped out. Right. So
exactly. Thanks. Because that's what I don't want to keep doing, because that's not working. Right.
Exactly. And so I'm hoping that a couple of people have evolved past the passive aggressive, like this is what my mom does to me when she's like struggling with stuff. When I was little, I'm supposed to figure everything out about and anticipate needs, which is impossible, you know. Anyone got any insights that you share?
Oh.
Sin, are you raising your hand?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Do y'all know spoon theory on this call? Does anybody know spoon theory up in here? Spoon theory, knives, cutlery, anyone?
Please help us.
So I can't remember who did this. It's not mine, but it's a disability trick. And it was a woman who suffered from chronic pain. Google it. I don't know the specifics, but she was trying to explain to a friend of hers who wasn't getting it, what the suffering from chronic pain was like, and what basically I need self-care meant, and that sort of stuff. And this other friend wasn't trying to be malicious. She just was not, it wasn't going there. So the first woman, they were at a restaurant, and the first woman goes to a waiter and goes, bring me cutlery, bring me spoons. And the waiter obliges and comes back with a whole bunch of spoons. And the woman with the disability sits there and counts them out and gives 10 to her friend and 3 to herself, and goes, okay, friend, because you are temporarily able-bodied, you have 10 spoons when you start the day. And she looks at herself and she goes, I only have 3, and I need to figure out how to spend them. And there are a lot of different ways to spend them, between taking out the trash, walk the dog, whatever. Make sense? Mm-hmm. And so it's not as though I don't love you or I'm trying to ghost you or any of that stuff. Sometimes I just don't have the spoons. And so then the friend goes, oh, and the light bulb goes off, and it's like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. So I have several friends that are in several different various stages of disability, and we make plans with each other all the time. But one of the things that we will do when we are making plans with each other and so on is we will ask each other, how many spoons do you have?
This is awesome.
And that is a way to deal with whatever without going into like all of the private stuff and having all of the private stuff just flapping in the wind out on Facebook. You know what I mean? Oh, I'm in so much pain, blah, blah, blah. You just, okay, do you have the spoons for this? Or how many spoons do you think you have? Or how many spoons do you think this is going to take? And we will rate it from 1 to 10, and we're just always kind of honest with each other about it. Make sense?
It's so great. And also, I mean, think of the wisdom of that kind of theory, is that spoons are knowable to everybody. We know what it's like when we don't have a spoon. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff that makes that relatable and takes all the, because I don't know about all of you, but when I have to seriously complain about how hurting I am, I always become self-conscious, like I shouldn't be saying anything.
Right.
Right. So that there's a different language and a symbol. This is the wonderful thing about symbols. Talking about it in terms of spoons is like a thing that it's so practical and direct. Right. And like the difference between saying you could call it toothpicks, that's not going to be as effective as spoons. There's something smart about it being put in terms of spoons. Right.
Just
and so developing a language and not just a number.
Yeah.
Because spoons are functional, right? They do work. If I just give you a number, how's your pain today? Anyone heard that in the doctor's office? I don't freaking know. Relative to what, you dink? Like, I don't know. I mean, relative to the pain I've ever been in my life, I'm at 1. Relative to you, it'd be like a 9, right? Like, I have no idea, right? And so the idea of doing it in something in terms of tangible and spoons is a great idea. Like, that's just a great, however you do it, it's better than a number. Yeah, I am hurting like a 6 today. I have no idea what a 6 means, right? Yeah. So I like that. Laura, your hand's up.
Yeah, I was just that's really cool, by the way. I'd never heard that before. That's excellent. I'm definitely gonna use that. I just going back to what Angela was saying, you know, I have no idea what the other phases or what phase I'm in or supposed to be in or whatever, but I know for me, you know, I was thinking about this because I knew you having this discussion, and for me, you know, being born with the disability and always having it, I think, and I know, by the way, before I say this, that this is crazy, right? So I didn't logically think this, but somewhere sounds like crazy, right? But like, I think I somewhere believed that the able-bodied version of me was living out there somewhere in the world, you know, like she was living this life that I wasn't living. And like, you know, I don't know, she was climbing mountains or something, and she was like environmentally friendly and wearing high heels, and, you know, I don't know, just essentially a better human being than me. And I was like, if I could just find her, you know, I would be living this life I'm supposed to be living, or I'd be a better version of me or whatever. And I think it was part of my strategy for survival. Like, something is wrong, you know, something like this isn't supposed to be happening to me or whatever. And I think part of coming to MBS, I was like, oh, I better start living in this body. I was like, because I'm living like out in the body I think I should have. And it was causing a lot of disassociation and pain and whatever. And it was because I was like, first of all, I also realized much later that like, I just thought if you're able-bodied, you must be better than me. You know what I mean? I was like, somewhere I was like, well, she must be so much happier and like better, just a better human being. And that's not true, you know? And so once I started going, oh, you could just live in the one you have, that would be an experience.
Yeah.
It started to get easier, or like Angela was saying, it started to become version of extremes. Like, I started to feel it in a different way. Like, some days were really sucky, but I was like, oh, this is what it's supposed to feel like now when I live in the actual body I own.
Mm-hmm. I
And
love
so
that you put the other body in high heels, which
yeah,
is
the one
one
in
of the
high
most
heels, and I dream about
dysfunctional
her.
things
She's
I've
out
ever
there
seen
somewhere.
women.
She's crushing life.
Right.
She's so much better at everything than me. But she doesn't exist. And for a long time, I sort of thought she did. And
But it's such great imagery irony, because high heels are so dysfunctional. So the idea that you would, you know, you know, like you'd put the better body in high heels, and then
I did.
Yeah, you know, like that's just fabulous. And part of what
I put her in high heels, and I
Yeah.
put her doing a lot of outdoorsy things that I can't do.
Yeah.
And I was like, she's doing them all. And I just gotta find her. She's out there somewhere crushing it. And I now realize that she's actually not. She's a figment of my imagination. And it took a lot away from living in, you know, in the one I actually have, because as you know, when I came, I was like, oh, I can actually do this. You know, I can actually live in this one, and it's not as painful as I thought it was going to be.
Well, so like, for example, to take this kind of language and evolving healing story and tie it back to how we started, it's like you created a gap between the body you had and the body in high heels, right? That's an expression capturing the extremes and all the space in between, right?
Mm-hmm.
Thinking that, and then also attributing that must be a better version of you. So there's a judgment. So that there's part of your healing story moving, right? To like create the distance, the signpost of better and not as good, right? And yet have somehow that other, there is probably use out of thinking about it as another body too. There's, you know, that probably also helped you in certain ways. I don't know what they were, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard a lot of people, you know, who've experienced loss say that, like, you know, you imagine had this, if this person was still here, this is where I'd be, you know, kind of thing. And I understand that's a very human thing, you know what I mean? But I also feel like it helps you to disassociate from the life you're actually in. And so it was a necessary phase that I just needed to move through, you know.
And
I
so
don't
what I'm hearing
imagine
also
her
in that
anymore.
story, Laura, is then the healing story started to emerge. What if I lived in the body I have?
Yeah.
Which then actually goes to the next line you said, just reflecting back your words, like that maybe I just assumed the other one was better and that wasn't actually true. Right. You know what I mean? Like what you're hearing, those are midstream, right? Like, and so Bill was holding the gap by trying to like be overly physical. Right?
Yeah, and I did that as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I signed myself up for all the classes and I went on campus like you did. And I was like, no, I will go to all the classes.
Right.
And then I spent 3 days in bed recovering from it. And it was not a wise decision. But I think I was trying to prove that I was not what I thought society thought I was. And I was like, okay, well, and you know that writer Cheryl Strayed, you know, she wrote Wales, and she has this great quote where she's like, you know, that's a sister life that sailed by on a ghost ship that you didn't board, either by choice or by chance. And I used to really visualize that person as an actual person, and now I don't have a visual image of her anymore because I let her go. Like she's gone, she sailed away on the ship, and I don't need her anymore. But for a long time, I needed her.
Yeah, and I just love the evolving, the way that your new stories don't live in that gap in the same way, right? Right, like the way, you know, and that's great. And the wild quote is great. Samantha, you have your hand up, and then Gail.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Hi, how are you today? Wow, I actually raised my hand like a couple people ago, so now I just have more to say, unfortunately. But I raised my hand originally because you'd asked the question about, you know, how we have come to, you know, so techniques that we use to define space for self-care. And as I was thinking about that, I was thinking, you know, really, if I'm going to be honest, I have been way harder on myself. I think that people around me, you know, God forbid they're going to tell me to slow down because they'd probably make me mad. So I think that I'm actually the heart of the problem, not people around me expecting more from me. I think that what I have had to do, what's been most effective for me has been to go easier on myself and to not feel that every day has to be a fight and that it's like I have to battle this out. And if I'm not in full battle regalia, I am somehow losing. And I have a real problem with how our culture talks about, you know, for me, it's a chronic illness. But I imagine with all disability, there is this sort of, you know, fighting through. And it's one other person on the call talked about the, you know, the problem with the heroic, you know, thing. I always hate it. You know, people always tell me how inspiring I am. And, you know, I have mixed feelings about that because, like, I don't know, like, right? I mean, okay. I mean, I literally have had conversations with people who, you know, for more or less are saying, you know, your life sort of sucks. And so I feel like I have to do more. And I'm like, yeah, actually my life is pretty great. So I don't know, now I'm starting to conflate two things. But on the first point, I do, and I'm hearing it from some other people who are talking, that I think we're hardest on ourselves. And we deny, I deny when I only have 2 bars, because I feel like I should have, or 2 spoons, and I should have 10 spoons. Like, why don't I have 10 spoons? And I was pissed off that I didn't have 10 spoons. Like, and I was going to have those 10 spoons. And that's the same thing about you going to school in a cold place and, you know, Bill doing all the amazing things he was doing. So you know, I think what I have learned, and one of the things that I've gotten out of being with all of you in the past year is, you know, you talk a lot about not having this be such a violent relationship with our bodies. And that, you know, I never really thought about it that way, but you're so right about it. That I think we come out of a sort of a violent model in terms of our as a culture, how we treat our bodies. Like, people are not nice to their bodies, whether they have a chronic illness or a disability or not. We don't live in a world that people are taught to be good to themselves. We're always taught to hold ourselves up to these unrealistic standards. And so I think focusing inward, I think people who love us tend to respect our boundaries and respect our decisions for self-care more than we think they do. And relaxing about that is, I've seen my family, you know, as I have relaxed about that, I can see them be almost visibly relieved that I'm not doing certain things anymore, you know, like, because otherwise they worry about me. Or I guess, you know, I get grumpy if I have 3 spoons and I'm pretending like I have 8. I tend not to be as pleasant to be around as I would like. The only other thing I was going to add was that that Laura was talking about this person outside herself, and I think that is incredibly, like, that we could spend a whole couple hours just on unpacking the power of the unlived life. And I think there's a wonderful
power of the onward life.
The unlived
Okay.
life.
Yep.
And there's actually a wonderful book about it. I'll find it and send it to everybody to look up. But it's I think also this is not unique to our struggles with disability. I think a lot of people spend their lives chronically comparing themselves to this other version of themselves that they felt that they should have been. Some other life was possible for them and they should have been living that. And then they're always comparing the life that they are living to this other version of the life that they feel that they should have had. You know, it's you know, it could be the marriage you thought you had, or you know, whether you have the ability to walk or not walk, or be sick or not be sick, or the job you thought you should have had or you didn't have, or the house you live in or didn't live in. You know, everybody has those things. And I think that all of these places where our experience with disability and chronic illness and injury, where those things intersect with the larger population, if you will, you know, with everybody, like, we were going to have these issues whether we had disabilities and chronic illnesses anyways. It's just that we have those. And I think in a way there's a gift in that, because I feel like my disability and my struggle over the last 30 years has been, it has taught me a lot. And because I've had to wrestle with things, that I am the person everybody else comes to when the shit hits the fan, because they know that, like, I have been through it and I have thought deeply about it. And so I can relate. And there's a gift in that. Like, I get to help other people, just like you, Matthew, do. Like, you have turned this into a gift that you give back.
Yeah, I also get a lot from all of you. So thanks for all that and insight. Everyone, these comments are great. Gail.
Yeah, first time on the call, or maybe not call, first time on this group format. So thank you for hosting it. And also to Angela for bringing up such a thought-provoking discussion. Yeah, I really appreciated people's shares and kind of thinking about these 3 stages or 3 different kind of periods and shifting back and forth between them. And I think what's I think what I wanted to share is I get like a somatic response when thinking about them. I can't say that I identify with the first stage for me as being a victim because my disability is invisible. And so I think for me, it's more denial than victim. And then the second stage, there feels like there is this like self-improvement or striving. And then there's this third stage, which I don't know as though I think there's maybe moments where I get to that third stage. But I do think there's a lot of fluctuation within those. And what came across to me is like the whole first stage, the denial was more of a like total disassociation from my body. And the second stage of like the self-improvement was almost more of a like leaning forward or clinging or grasping or trying to reach for something. And it being really effortful. And what I'm hoping is that the third stage, whatever we want to call it, that there's a way to kind of rest back and relax into the allowing, the acceptance, the like the goodness, the whatever is actually inherently within us, despite these stories or stereotypes or radical acceptance. There we go. Thanks, Angela. I'm hoping that third stage is because when I do have those moments of feeling it, it is more easeful in the body. And so I just wanted to share that. Thank you for hosting
awesome. And there are many doorways to that ease, I mean, and part of what we're trying to show at Mind Body Solutions is the possibility of not having to end the striving version of yourself, but also temper that striving with receiving and ease, right? In a way, an asana is an integration of the quiet relief with effort. And so the line from the sutras is when effortful effort becomes effortless, you've encountered a new way of breathing, right? And so that's kind of what you're talking about. And radical acceptance may get you that. Sounds a little mental to me, but that's my take on it. That's how I hear the words. But part of what we're trying to show is by increasing grounding, by increasing balance, not just pushing and striving, you can integrate a relief dimension into your efforts of every day, right? So that's great. So Christopher.
Hi. First time joining any of your offerings. Thank you to Gail, by the way, for reminding me and reminding about this. So before really sharing anything about my experience, I wanted to chime in with this thought that I had several years ago. I'll just say for the past decade, I've been, on some journey that started thanks to like contemplative practice and mind-body practices and all that. And obviously a lot of other things that went with it, like opening up socially and blah, 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 right? And I had this thought several years ago, and it was at a period where I think I was spending a lot of time unpacking a lot of this. And it was also at a point, if I'm being perfectly honest, where I think I spent a lot more time in the second and third phase on a day-to-day or week-to-week or minute-to-minute basis than I do now. I had this thought of everything is a freaking story. And I've really spent a lot of time telling myself stories about limitation and pain and like how I'm not good enough or attractive or XYZ. And wouldn't it be awesome, like, since everything's a story anyway, to just start to start intentionally telling myself better stories, like stories about how I'm a survivor, or how this is just a piece of me that, you know, has both been a gift and a curse, and anything else, that I'm freaking awesome and attractive and people love to be around me, like whatever. And I had that thought of like, okay. And then the also thought of like, I better be really careful, because the minute I forget that I'm just telling myself a story, that's a danger zone, because a story can turn really fast, or a story can like be really helpful one moment and really not so helpful. And it was just that thought of, I want to do that.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that I think is a signpost that helps with that is that whatever story you're telling, whenever at any particular time, this is like a commitment to truthfulness. It's got to have some truthful aspects to it, right?
Right.
And as long as you stay grounded in that it's got truth in it, it may not be the only possible description of that truth, then that's going to guide you against stories that, like, you know, you're the Dalai Lama, and in fact you're you know what I mean, like some of the real ungrounding stories that could happen, you know. But and I know you do that, but that's part of how I try to safeguard against my healing stories. Need to have some truth, or else they're just rationalizations. Yeah. Right? Or, you know, but keep going. I like where you're going here, man. Where are you from, by the way?
United States, Missouri.
Missouri. Okay, keep going.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I ever was that bold to get, or that, like, I think, you know, I was really trying to be like a large part of my work was to be more self-aware. So I don't think I was like, that thought of like, I'm gonna like go way off the rails with my story hadn't really occurred to me, other than the fact that like I could get really attached and identified to the story. And
yeah,
and that even if it's a story that like I think in the moment is somehow going to be really helpful, or make me feel better, as if that's the goal, I better not forget that it's also just a story, just like those other things. I will say I had that thought. I clearly remember that insight from several years ago. Can't say I regularly live it.
right.
Yeah, even remember it. And even when I do remember it, it's like the stories are powerful. And some of the stories, you know, some of my work has been like, recently this summer, I got really fed up with the sense of like some of what you all were talking about, of like that, oh, I got to put on the survivor story. I got to be strong. I got to be inspirational. I got to, you know, it's just that sense of toxic positivity. And
Yeah.
I got really sick of it. Like, and then I had, you know, some identity of like, I'm someone who had been teaching mindfulness. And it was just like, you know, I got this sour taste in my mouth. And the only person I really wanted to talk to was my best friend, because with her, I know I could just say like, you know what, I feel like shit today. And this really isn't fun. And I know I'm really grateful to be alive, but a thought that comes up regularly is like, I really hate my life.
Right.
And
both can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. By the way, if you find yourself getting sick of your own stories, it's probably a good sign. You know what I mean? That's a sign that they're always under revision, which is good. With part of this struggle, Kevin Kling said and Bethany, if you're online, find it and put it in the chat room. I interviewed Kevin, who's a world famous storyteller, right? And he makes this distinction between, he talks about, so he was born with a disability, and then he 21 years ago was in a motorcycle accident. So he has one bad arm that doesn't work very well. It's TAR syndrome. And then he completely paralyzed his other arm in an accident for the last 21 years. And and in a motorcycle accident. And he in part of his healing recovery, he eventually, after suffering with PTSD and a whole bunch of pain and stuff, worked with a therapist who had him go back through the day of the accident and just told him to miss the car instead of hit the car. He hit a car, right, on his motorcycle. And he makes this comment, and it's on film, where he says, in order to sleep at night, I need to miss the car, right? But every morning I wake up and I hit the car, and that's okay too. And I need both stories and both versions of himself, right? And there's something really wise about that that made me think of what you were talking about. Like, you get to be sick of your life and hate your life and be grateful for living, right? In a way, you need both sides of that story. And what's great about stories is, as long as they're grounded in some aspect of truth, like, they don't have to all line up into a neat formula. You know, what kind of book is good that's only good, right? It's got the whole mess in it, because that's what our lives have in it, you know? Dang, man, I almost want to call another one of these. I feel like we're just getting started here. Does anyone have anything they want to wrap up? Dang, we might have to have one sooner. I mean, I feel like we're just at the beginning of what's like unfolding here. And I didn't even teach any freaking yoga, right? So damn it. And unfortunately, I have to go. I can't stay on extra, but if you want to keep telling stories, one of our staff can stay on. Does anyone have any drop the mic things they want to say? Amanda, your hand's up. You're dropping the mic, and then I'm gonna like give a short teaching of a pose or something. Amanda, you have the floor.
I was just wondering, what people that have got lack of movement, how do they dream? Because when I'm feeling really secure, and this has only happened recently, I dream that I have got the body that I have got during the day. But normally, or most of the time, I dream that I'm a different person, and I'm far more able-bodied than I was before I started to become disabled. A little bit like Laura. I've got another person, and she also wears high heels. And I've also got a shelf full of high heels that I bought when I went in the wheelchair, because I thought, dang, now I can wear the bloody high heels. But I can't, because I can't balance in the chair, because I didn't realise it affected how, you balance even in a chair. But I was just wondering how people
It's the greatest tragedy. You can say it's other things, but it is the greatest tragedy.
I never knew you couldn't wear high heels in a chair.
You can't.
Damn it.
Well, I'm glad you don't know, Matthew.
No.
Do whatever you want to do, Matt. We accept you, whatever you wear. Okay.
That would be another great freaking time. How do you dream and represent yourself in dreams?
Yeah.
Like, I got whole versions of how that goes, right? Like, damn, I could go on for a long time about all the different versions. And I have them all the time. I had one this morning. I was public speaking and couldn't find an accessible bathroom.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that was just one of those deals, right? So quick,
dream that I can
did
run.
you put your hand up? Go ahead, Amanda. Finish.
Sometimes I dream I can run, and I have never been able to run. Even before diagnosis, I don't know what it's like to run, but I do in my dreams.
All right. So everyone on this call, let's, instead of having to have a yoga disability and transformation, so we have this team adaptables, right? That put in the link, your email address. Let's have one about how we dream and represent ourselves in dreams.
Yes.
Or at least a continuation of this conversation. Because I think we're ripe here. There's some really good stuff beginning to come out. It is a team of heroes. Team Adaptables, if you watch the movie Adaptables, that was like That family. It's one of my favorite movies is Team Adaptables. So I would love to continue this conversation for sure. Sin, did you have your hand up quick?
I was just gonna say that I don't have my wheelchair when I dream. I dance, I swim, I run, I fly, all kinds of stuff, but I never dreamt in the chair. So I can understand where I don't know names, but I can understand where the person who just made that comment is coming from. And I can also understand where the woman is coming from who has another part of her that's the girl in heels. Because whenever I'm dreaming, and it's not that I don't understand that I'm in a wheelchair. I was born with some medical conditions, but in dreams, the chair does not exist. It just doesn't.
Another topic of a great story would be that girl in heels, right? Again, like this is where one of the things we tried to do in Body, Mind, Story, and maybe we can try to have one for all of us, and I'll get Kevin and Patricia to try to do one online. But where story intersects art to create transformation.
Yeah. So
what I've been trying to like package up back to you is to say like that, you know, the plow and the post, right? That girl in high heels, and how you unpack that high heels that don't actually work when you sit in a chair. It's not only for balance, but I'm sure your feet come off the pedals. I'm sure there's a whole story there of times you know, who knows, right? But like this is what I want to get across when I want to challenge all of us to start figuring out stories about our experience that invite the listener in so they get more deeply through the archetype of story what the experience is. So where and there's a point at which in storytelling, some stories, the first rounds of stories for a long time are stories for your own courage. There's stories of you describing what your experience is, and you're not ready to think about the listener, right? You're not ready to think about a bigger audience. And then I mean, I didn't write Waking for 20, 25 years because of exactly that, right? And then I reached a point, just like Laura maybe started not thinking about the girl in heels, right? Where all of a sudden I could tell stories differently, and I didn't need it to be about me, and I was ready to let in the sensibility of the listener, right? In the formation of my art of story. And that in fact, and this is one of a lesson again from Kevin Kling about story that I learned, is that it's actually in that dance and that interplay that the story actually finds its deepest truth, right? And becomes something that you don't, where you start and where you end up in a refined story is not where you expect. And it's been changed and transformed because you've started to let it be art, as opposed to just what you need to say. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't tell stories about what you need to say, or know those stories too, right? And that's part of, in a way, if you talk about the three different levels of story of identity, when are you ready to let go of the fact that the world's unfair for what happened to you? When are you ready to stop willing yourself to survive it as another level of story, right? Those are your courage stories. And then there's the story that actually is the lion's story that actually transforms not just the hunter, but the whole field. The whole playing field changes because the story no longer has as much of an agenda and invites in the intelligence of the listener, not tells the listener what to think, right? And that's what's so beautiful about story, and why stories shift consciousness, not knowledge, not information, right? It's always been stories for human beings. So just to give you, and then to wrap up, just to give you a little, so the idea, one of the things so sit up straight and tall. Like, you know, that idea of vulnerability is a hard one. That ability of overcoming is, and wanting to prove and that you're okay. So in a yoga pose, when I start telling beginning students that, especially beginning students, to lift their chest, they tend to overlift their chest, right? They want to show them, damn it, or I'm going to get that arm over my head, even though if it's, right? Maybe you're recognizing yourself right now. I'm going to, you know, whatever, right? Yep. And then there's a place at which, like, you ground first, right? You start to feel you're sitting more than your feet. You let the downward energy be here. You let the space in the room be here. And then you start to lift your chest. And you let it get more active, but keep your lips together and teeth slightly apart. Keep the inside of your mouth soft. So start to activate your will while doing something simultaneously. Talking about the relief, I think it was Gail that was wanting to get to where the relief part is, or maybe it was Samantha, I can't remember. Right, where this is something you can practice from body to mind. Don't look for mental relief. Find it in your body, even a body that hurts. There are spaces within your body that don't hurt. That level of finding that in your body, learning to let your body rest, is a form of healing. Right, so although you're acting and lifting your chest and grounding and being strong and filling the vessel and entering the world from inside to out, make sure you keep enough, the softness, the clarity, the softening the temples, the tongue in the lower palate, the feeling of connecting the holes in your ears, of the space between your neck and your shoulders, of the space behind you. All this is happening at once. It was never just about your effort. Self-realization comes from what's less tangible. So do your stories. You just need the support of a kind listener, one that's interested and curious, one that'll give you feedback. I've heard some great stories today. Some great, and stories that are wanting to evolve if you're ready to start sharing them with the greater. Like, I'd love to create a, you know, have you submit stories, not long ones, short ones. Don't get intimidated by having to write a whole book. Wisdom stories. All right, everybody, damn it. We'll give you a message for Team Adaptables. Maybe we'll call it how we dream, right? For the short one. In the meantime, just like Angela did, the Yoga Disability and Transformation series next year, it's up for grabs. I woke up this morning thinking about all of you and thought about one being called Let Your Body Be, or Let My Body Be. Can you hear Let My People Go, right? From Moses, from, like, you know, let my body be, right? Which, getting back to Samantha's wisdom, usually you're the one that doesn't let your body be, right? Like, it's not really the world that's trying to do your body, right? But submit other ideas for topics. Let's make these things be self-actualized as a group, shared. The insights come from everyone. And for the new people coming today, I'm psyched. I'm just glad you came. I hope you continue to come. There's some really good stuff on this call, right? All right, everybody, hands together. Namaste. The spirit in me bows the spirit in you. And damn, I'm glad about your stories, right? Find them. Make them art. All right, everybody. See you next time.